Hello everybody and welcome to another edition of Ukraine This Week with me, Don Arleth. It's been a big week. Finally, the United States lifted restrictions on Ukraine to use long-range weapons on Russian targets in Russia. And Vladimir Putin responded by sending an intermediate-range ballistic missile on Dnipro. We've got two fantastic guests today, General Ben Hodges and Tymofiy Mylovanov, so stay with us. Now let's go to the most important stories coming out of Ukraine. As Russia maintained its widespread air attacks across Ukraine, the toll of human suffering increased, claiming the lives of children and adults and injuring scores of others. As freezing winter conditions begin to bite, the Russian attacks have also caused massive power outages.
Video released by Ukrainian authorities shows the aftermath of a Russian drone attack in the northeastern Sumy region. Local officials said 6 people were killed here, including a child. 12 people were also injured in the drone attack on a residential dormitory in the small town of Hulkiv. The day before, a Russian missile attack killed 10 people and wounded 44 in Ukraine's Black Sea port of Odessa, according to the local governor and national police. 4 children were among the wounded, while 3 people were left in a serious condition. Officials said a Russian ballistic missile hit a residential neighborhood, damaging an apartment building, part of a university, and an administrative building. The dead included 7 police officers, a medic, and 2 residents. Hours earlier, 10 people, including 2 children, were killed and 52 injured on Sunday night when a Russian missile hit a residential 9-story building in the Sumy region. The attack on Sumy followed a morning of Russia pounding Ukraine's power grid in what Kyiv said was a massive attack with 120 missiles and 90 drones. Elsewhere, an 11-year-old boy was killed and his 13-year-old sister injured in an attack on the Donetsk region, while 2 people were also killed in the Kherson region.
The Biden administration has announced a $275 million military aid package for Ukraine. This latest support package includes ammunition and, for the first time, anti-personnel landmines.
According to a Pentagon statement, the supplies will include much-needed artillery ammunition and mortar rounds and high-mobility artillery rocket system, or HIMARS, ammunition. The U.S. State Department said it was providing the urgently needed weapons and equipment to Ukraine as it defended against Russia's ongoing attacks. The outgoing Biden administration has provided some $64 billion in military aid to Kyiv since Russia's invasion in February 2022. However, the future of the US commitment to providing arms to Ukraine remains uncertain as President-elect Donald Trump prepares to take office in January 2025.
There are warnings that the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is at risk of total blackout after Russian shelling severed one of 2 lines supplying power to the giant plant.
Ukraine's energy ministry says attacks by Russia around the massive Zaporizhzhia complex in southern Ukraine have caused safety-threatening damage. Officials are warning that Europe's largest nuclear power station faces a total blackout after shelling by Moscow's troops left the plant connected to the national grid by just one transmission line. The Zaporizhzhia site has been under the Kremlin's control since early March 2022, just days after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine began. Its 6 reactors were shut down 7 months later in September 2022. It's been subjected to numerous attacks over the past 2 years and suffered a major fire in a cooling tower in September. The International Atomic Energy Agency is monitoring developments at Zaporizhzhia. The Energy Ministry said its engineers will begin to restore full power to the station as soon as the security situation allows. Both Ukraine and Russia have accused each other's forces of attacking the plant.
The United Kingdom has reached a major milestone in its program to train Ukrainian troops. The UK's Ministry of Defence says that more than 50,000 Ukrainian recruits have now been put through their paces under Operation Interflex, which prepares them for battle by boosting their skills and readiness.
Battle simulations in the British countryside. They're being held for the new recruits for Ukraine's defence against Russia's invasion. While they're far from the front line, the lessons they learn here can help save lives. They're taking part in a 5-week boot camp under the UK's Operation Interflex, which has now trained 50,000 Ukrainian men and women. The trainees are participating in tactical casualty care in combat at a training site in southwest England. Operation Interflex is supported by international partners who deploy soldiers to the UK to help train both voluntary and conscripted Ukrainians. A total of 13 countries support the programme, providing essential military training at various facilities. The training operation was due to come to an end this year, but will now continue until at least the end of 2025.
The war in Ukraine has witnessed major developments on both sides, with the outgoing Biden administration allowing Kyiv to attack sites within Russia using U.S. weapons, and Moscow unleashing a new hypersonic ballistic missile. President Putin claims the weapon cannot be intercepted by existing defense systems and warned that Moscow could hit back against countries supplying long-range weapons used by Ukraine.
CCTV footage captures the moment multiple bright flashes rained down from the sky in Ukraine's Dnipro. Russia says it fired a new hypersonic intermediate-range ballistic missile at the city. Its launch came after President Joe Biden agreed to Kyiv's use of its ATACMS missiles to take out key military targets far from the front lines. They're thought to have been used to attack an ammunition depot in Russia's Bryansk region. The UK has also allowed its long-range Storm Shadow weapons to hit Russian positions that would otherwise be beyond Ukraine's reach. On Friday, Sky News reported that Ukraine's military, for the first time, confirmed the use of British-made Storm Shadow missiles inside Russian territory. Ukraine is currently limited to targets in the Kursk region only. Storm Shadows are thought to have been deployed in this attack on a Russian army command post in the town of Mariino. The Kremlin claims the new Oreshnik missile is unstoppable, travelling at 10 times the speed of sound, with a range of 5,000 kilometres. Vladimir Putin warned the West that Moscow could strike the military installations of any country whose weapons were used against Russia. The Biden team has also agreed to supply defensive landmines to Ukraine. While the State Department has described them as non-persistent anti-personnel landmines, the move was criticized by human rights organizations. Russia also this week changed its nuclear doctrine. Now an attack from a non-nuclear state, if backed by a nuclear power, will be treated as a joint assault on Russia. The move came as Ukraine marked the 1,000th day of the conflict. The rule change means a large attack on Russia with conventional weapons could place Ukrainians in the firing line from the Kremlin's new, lower criteria for a nuclear response.
And now here to discuss all this week's developments, joining me is General Ben Hodges, former commander of U.S. Army forces in Europe. Hello, and thank you very much for joining me on Ukraine this week.
Thanks, Don. Glad to be here.
Now, I'm going to start with the biggest elephant in the room, and it's what we saw and witnessed the other day. Your assessment of this RS-26 Rubezh intermediate range ballistic missile. Previously it was classified as intercontinental ballistic missile. What is your immediate assessment on Russia's use of this weapon on the city of Dnipro?
This tells me that they are terrified that Ukraine now has use of ATACMS, Storm Shadow, and SCALP against targets inside Russia. They dreaded this. Now Ukraine has already destroyed a major ammunition storage site. They've already hit an important headquarters location. And of course, the Russians remember when Ukraine first employed Storm Shadow in Sevastopol, when it destroyed the Black Sea Fleet headquarters and it destroyed the dry dock that was an essential part of their maintenance capability in Sevastopol. And so the Black Sea Fleet had to move out of the Crimea. So that's what I take from this, that they dreaded Ukraine getting those capabilities. And so they're trying to exploit the excessive amount of fear that is in Washington and Berlin and some other capitals that, oh my God, Russia might use a nuclear weapon.
Now, the Pentagon says it was warned, some say about a half an hour before this missile was launched. Why is this important, that there's communications along these lines to avoid escalation, I would imagine?
Well, there have been procedures in place for decades to avoid misunderstandings about when one side or the other launches a test, for example, of one of their missiles. So it seems like, and I only know this from reading the media as well, that call may have happened like that. But I would also say that I have a lot of confidence that our early warning systems are able to tell when Russia is getting ready to launch one of these types of weapons.
Now, with a ballistic missile, with an intercontinental ballistic missile or missiles of these types, normally they would be, I mean, they were designed and built to carry nuclear warheads, right? They have several warheads per missile. From the footage that we see coming out from the Ukrainian armed forces, it looks like these warheads were inert. Is there any conventional weapon that can be used on an intercontinental ballistic missile that will make it effective on the battlefield?
Well, it's interesting, I think, that Russia has been using a lot of weapons that are nuclear capable from the start since February of 22, when they started the special operation or the large-scale invasion. So the fact that they employed a missile now that is was not carrying a nuclear warhead, but is capable of carrying it, actually, that's old news. Mm-hmm. But this is all part of the scare tactic. And then the video you keep showing there, of course, that was released by the Kremlin. That's actually one of their spaceships that was launched a couple of years ago. But they are trying to create imagery that all of us look at and like, oh my God, this is the end of the world. That's exactly the effect that they want. Or when you get newspapers that have a big headline like the Daily Mail did that says Russia launches nuclear capable weapon. But they've been doing that for 3 years. And I think that we need to be cool. The Ukrainians are not, they're not more scared today than they were yesterday, because they've been dealing with this from the beginning. And I think this is the time where we should say, you know what, we're going to double down on what we've provided Ukraine. We're going to give them every ATACMS that we have and take the handcuffs off. They can use them wherever they need to, as long as it's not a violation of law of armed conflict, i.e. don't target civilians.
So long story short, basically we should be really underwhelmed at Russia's attempt to escalate or to instill fear in us due to the allowing of Ukraine to use the ATACMS and the Storm Shadows.
Yeah, we have got to fix the main mistake that we in the West have made from the beginning. We never did say why this matters to us. We have not said we want Ukraine to win because it's in our interest. All of this support for Ukraine is not charity. As inspiring as Ukrainians are, this is about stability and security in Europe, which affects the economies of all of us, including the U.S. and Canada. This is about, preventing Russia from being able to take the war further into Europe. It's to our advantage that Ukraine actually defeats Russia. And, of course, that sends a message to the Chinese as well, that we do have the political will and the capability to help Ukraine defeat Russia. That's been the biggest mistake, and because we haven't done that, we have had a lot of really goofy kind of policies about what we deliver, why it takes so long, and you have restrictions on what they can do with it, things that make absolutely no sense. And clearly, escalation management by the Biden administration has been a failure. I mean, this war has been prolonged because of this lack of decisive action by all of us. And I think what I see are European leaders like Prime Minister Tusk and others in Europe are realizing that they're going to have to step up and do a lot more because the United States is not going to solve it ourselves. And they're not sure what a Trump administration will bring either.
In terms of the Biden administration, just 2 months to go before President-elect Donald Trump is sworn in. So this decision coming quite late in the game, is it too little too late? And also, I'll throw this on top of there. We're still about $7 billion short from the $60 billion supplemental that hasn't been supplied out of U.S. stocks. And some say it's because the stocks are too low. What are the chances that we're going to get these weapons deployed on the battlefield to Ukraine before President-elect Trump comes in?
So I think that what's going on now on the U.S. side and with many of our allies, that they are scrambling to get as much done as they possibly can. The lack of urgency prior to this, not by the women and men with doing the hands-on stuff in Germany, in Poland, or shipping it from the States. And I'm not talking about them. They're working round the clock. I'm talking about getting the authorities, what the administration has done, has been so slow to do, to move it. So they're trying to catch up now, get as much done as they can. I think we're going to see more things continuing to move. Although I don't see a big, obviously the Congress is not going to pass another package beyond what's already been done until we're into the new Congress and the new administration. Is it too little, too late? I definitely say it's still insufficient, and it's definitely late, but it's never too late to give Ukraine capabilities that will enable them to kill or destroy Russian headquarters, Russian logistics, and Russian artillery. It's never too late to do that. And also give them the ability to use these weapons against the sites from which Russia is launching these airstrikes that are killing innocent Ukrainian civilians every day. My friend General Breedlove, he says, kill the archer. That's better than trying to intercept all the arrows. That's what Ukraine needs to be able to do.
Tomahawks have been mentioned as a potential game changer. If we gave a bunch of Tomahawks, first of all, would it be cost effective, and would it achieve what Ukraine wants them for?
So I generally don't like the phrase game changer when we talk about a particular weapon or platform, because unless you provide tens of thousands of them, there is no weapon that's going to be the game changer. What would be the game changer would be a declaration by the administration and other European countries that it's our policy that Ukraine wins, and therefore we're going to do everything they need so that they win. That would be game changing. Now, of course, Tomahawk or any kind of precision capability like that has that sort of reach, that would make it very difficult for Russia to continue to launch the airstrikes they're launching against civilian targets in Ukraine. You know, the ATACMS and the Storm Shadow, those are tactical range weapons out to about 300 or 400 kilometers. Those are ideal for striking headquarters and logistics, ammunition storage, for example. Tomahawk, of course, could strike these airfields that are deep inside of Russia, from which they are launching these strikes against civilian targets inside Ukraine. I would always be for that. And the Ukrainians are better than anybody I've ever seen at learning how to integrate new weapon systems.
China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. With President-elect Trump coming into office, from what we know, it seems like he's going to target Iran with very tough sanctions. He's going to try and isolate the regime. He's going to try and cut off their oil sales. Easier said than probably done. But what about Russia in this case? If Trump takes a really hard stance on Iran, is Russia going to allow this to happen? Will it fear the response from the Trump administration? What are your thoughts?
So we don't know exactly how the Trump administration is really going to govern and act when it comes to Russia, Ukraine, and the North Korea and China. I don't assume he'll do the same thing he did last time. And interestingly, the Trump administration will have enormous leverage over Russia. This is a different dynamic because they can come in and he can tell Vladimir Putin, say, hey, look, I'm taking the gloves off. I'm going to give Ukraine everything they want, no restrictions. And by the way, we're going to stop Russia. We're going to stop your ability to export oil and gas to China and India, which is the only thing that's keeping Russia in the fight is the money that they get from sales to China and India. So President Trump could come in and do that. I don't know that he will. And certainly a lot of the things that were said by people around him during the campaign don't give me a lot of optimism about it. But he was not as, let's just say, I don't think his foreign policy is driven by moral principle as much as it's a power thing. And so I look to the Congress, and where you've got most of the Republican leadership in the Senate and in the House, the Republicans are very pro-Ukraine. They are pro-transatlantic. They are pro-NATO. And so I think that they, plus people like Prime Minister Tusk or Secretary General Mark Rutte, who just flew to Florida to see Mr. Trump down at Mar-a-Lago, to convey, look, Mr. President, you will be blamed if Ukraine fails. It'll happen during your administration. He won't want that. And this is to America's advantage if we do this. And the Europeans, I think, are going to take on a lot more burden. Trump can take credit for that. So to your last point about Iran, I actually think if we were looking at this in a strategic way, you would connect Russia, Iran, North Korea, and China, with a strategy being defeat Russia first. That will isolate Iran. Iran has no friends on the planet except the Kremlin. North Korea has no friends on the planet except the Kremlin. So if Russia is defeated, they're much less able to help Iran or help North Korea. That would obviously have a knock-on effect with making Iran less able to support Hezbollah or the Houthis. And then the Chinese would say, wow, the West is serious about these so-called international rules-based order. So that's how I hope the president approaches it, with the end game being China successfully deterred.
Do you think that the next American president, if he does not break up the China, Russia, Iran, North Korea axis, that we are going to be entering a much more dangerous world in the future?
Well, right now, we're not at peace. I think people cringe at the idea if we say, well, we're at war. We're the United States, Poland, Germany, UK. We're not at war in the traditional sense with Russia or China. Certainly, we're fighting against Houthis. Certainly, we have had our pilots up in the air, along with Royal Air Force and French pilots, shooting down Iranian missiles over Israel. But Russia is at war with us. They clearly are at war with us. They in China, Iran, they're all doing things, sabotage. We just saw the cables in the Baltic Sea that were cut. The disinformation, interference in our domestic politics, criminal activity all over the place, continuous violations of airspace. Why do we not respond? Why are we not shooting down missiles that go through Polish airspace or Latvian airspace or Romanian airspace? Until we get in the mindset of being at war, or recognize that we're not at peace, and do the things necessary to inflict some pain on the Russians, they're not going to change their behavior.
Certainly, Foreign Minister Landsbergis from Lithuania has recently said that we're not really calling a spade a spade. We're calling it hybrid warfare, but we're not calling it terrorist attack. Meanwhile, NATO is considering the proper response if indeed this latest cable-cutting incident in the Baltic Sea was done intentionally. So for my final question, what would be a proper response from NATO to finally do what Minister Landesberger said, call a spade, and actually respond to these attacks?
Well, first of all, Foreign Minister Landsbergis is one of the brightest lights in Europe among diplomats and leaders. I love the way he speaks so clearly. First of all, we can't just talk about, being extremely concerned about these violations. We've been extremely concerned for years, and the Russians and Chinese have only increased what they're doing. This big Chinese vessel out there, the Danish Navy did respond to it. To their great credit, that thing should be forced in, and until a thorough investigation has been conducted. We're not looking for evidence like in a murder case where you have to have incontrovertible evidence. We may get it wrong a couple of times, but until we start seizing ships that are probably involved in this, until we get serious about stopping Russia from exporting oil and gas, which almost all of it goes out through the Baltic Sea or the Black Sea, the interests to both of which are controlled by NATO countries. Why are we not doing something about that? And I think if we're going to call a spade, let's be serious. Don't call it hybrid warfare, because hybrid warfare sounds kind of like not really that harmless. It is a conflict. They are at war with us. We definitely are not at peace. Call it what you want, but until we inflict pain on the Russians and the Chinese, they're not going to change behavior.
All right, General Ben Hodges, thank you very much for joining us on Ukraine This Week. We always appreciate your analysis. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for the privilege.
And now, to get an analysis straight out of Ukraine, my next guest is Tymofiy Mylovanov, advisor at the Office of the Ukrainian President and President of Kyiv School of Economics and former Minister of the Economy. Hello, and thank you very much for joining me on Ukraine This Week.
Hello.
Now, I guess to address the elephant in the room, just as we did with General Hodges, what is the take on this recent strike on Dnipro using this intermediate range ballistic missile or de facto intercontinental ballistic missile?
I think it's more of a communication, psychological and political warfare than actual warfare. So there's a lot of discussions, the news are covered with it, but I don't want to diminish the importance of this, but there is an expectation of a escalation after the United States and the allies, well, except Germany, but they allowed to use deep strikes for Ukraine. So there's an expectation of a major escalation. There's a nuclear doctrine change. There's all kind of threatening from the Russian side. And what we get a missile coming in Dnipro. It's, of course, potentially an escalation. It's a different type of weapon. It's scary, but I think that's the purpose, to achieve, to basically paralyze the West. And I think they've been fantastic grandmastering at this. So with their nuclear rhetoric and informational warfare, they have been able to delay and sometimes completely stifle and silence response from the West to their provocations, to their escalations. And so I think this should stop.
But at the same time, doesn't this seem to symbolize that Russia is finally out of options? It can't escalate any more than it already has. We assume that they're not going to use nuclear weapons, despite them revising their nuclear doctrine to make it appear that they would do so. So isn't this unveiled in some kind of a way, maybe good news, that Russia is out of options?
So it is definitely a sign of desperation. Let me be specific about what I mean. First, the nuclear doctrine, that's also a rhetorical exercise, because Putin has never been constrained by the nuclear doctrine, because he can change it at will. In fact, he can do whatever he wants. If he violates his own nuclear doctrine, who's going to prosecute him? No one. So, and he can get his parliament vote, whatever is needed, within half an hour. So this has never been constrained. It's only done for rhetorical purposes. Then You look at the state of the Russian economy. People are not paying much attention to it, but inflation is all-time high. The capacity of the manufacturing is exhausted. There are labor shortages. The unemployment rate is all-time low, and most of the companies in defense industry cannot get workers. Why there are no workers? Or because they have been mobilized, or some of them have been killed. You can't continue to kill 30,000 people a month and not notice it in the labor market. There will be a direct effect, fewer people, and there will be indirect effect, a chilling effect that people start hiding. Then you look at the sign-up bonuses for military. They went up over a couple of months from $10,000 to 22, in some areas $30,000, so 3 times. So there are signs time and again which show that Russian economy is in a tough spot. And then this North Korean troops. Yeah, you can get 10,000, you can get 100,000, but it basically means that you are out of your own troops. Because it's not cheap to get troops from another country. You have to give up something. And that something is pretty costly for Russia, even though we don't quite know what that is.
We had Anders Aslund on the program not too long ago, and he was saying that Russia needs to finish this up next year. What is your outlook on the Russian economy? How long can Russia keep this up?
Well, so, to be honest, it's a little bit difficult for both sides, and I'm diplomatic here. It's like a professional boxing match, round number 10 or 11. Both sides are barely standing. Both sides are resolute or not. Whoever gives up, whoever is weaker might lose the match. So, it's difficult for Ukrainian economy. It is difficult for Ukrainian people, but we are at least very clear about why we are doing it. We want to survive as a nation. We want to survive as people. I want to survive as an individual. I'm in Kyiv. Today, there have been alerts. So, I can die every day. Why are Russians doing that? That's an open question. What have they achieved by killing or wounding 700,000 of their own people? A couple of villages and a town destroyed completely? So I don't know. Was it worse that? Global isolation, ruined economy, and a now 1 million to 2 million people who are completely war affected through all this cruelty and brutality. They're going to go back into the labor force right away with all this criminal attitude and brutality. So Russia is actually in a deep trouble. And I think you are correct that within the next year, I would say within the next half a year, with the Trump administration or without the Trump administration, we'll see the climax.
Now, referring to the North Korean soldiers, there are appearing the first reports that they could be in the Kharkiv region. I'd like to get the Ukrainian perspective about this. I know that the response from the West was very underwhelming when it comes to the North Koreans being deployed to the Kursk region. But now, if they're on the territory of Ukraine, what do you think should be the response from the West? Because I think there should be.
I agree with you. So, one of the biggest surprises for some people in the West, for some analysts, was that the war has not escalated outside of Ukraine. And when people say that, they exactly deny the reality. The reality is that Russia is now fighting together with North Korea using troops and artillery. It's fighting together with Iran using Shaheds and missiles. And it's fighting together with China because it provides a vehicle to sell oil and actually finance the war. So in that sense, it's a global conflict in which the axis of China, Iran, and Russia are coordinating together on Ukraine. There's also, of course, the Middle East where Iran is. So these are coordinated issues, and the United States and Europe and NATO have to address them. What is happening is that we're looking at the symptoms of a bigger problem, and no one is willing to open their eyes and start thinking about the strategy, how to put an end to it. So someone is thinking it's just if we can get some kind of deal or some kind of peace in some region, the problem will disappear. It will not. So the response should be there. I think the real response should be weapons, quota of funding, defense technology, defense production, and troops. It could be different forms of the troops. It could be peacekeeping troops post-war. It could be some other versions of that. And Ukraine has to get into NATO or somewhere else, because we basically have to stop this war, but we have to stop this war by being honest about this. We have a very harsh, aggressive adversary who is coordinating with several other countries, and it can only be stopped by force because there's no diplomatic leverage.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if if foreign troops would be sent in to directly engage North Korean soldiers who are engaging in combat on Ukrainian land. That would be something to see for sure. I'd like to ask you about the rhetoric that Vladimir Putin is using around, we all know, the special military operation, but with this latest missile on Dnipro, he said this was a test. Do you think that this rhetoric is detrimental to the policymakers and the way they are looking at the effects of what Russia is doing in Ukraine by using such rhetoric?
Of course, he is effective with this rhetoric. He is basically threatening again, saying, I'm going to escalate. It's a test. I can do more. There's this nuclear doctrine, and then everyone gets paralyzed. Remember 9/11? A small group of people, bin Laden, with a successful terrorist attack, have been able to paralyze the United States for a while and actually force their foreign policy response in some ways. Not completely, but definitely to provoke it. So, you know, and that was not even a state terrorist actor. Putin is a state terrorist actor with much more infrastructure to do what he's doing, to threaten and put in a very afraid, scared state the Western politicians and the public. And they have mastered this. I think we have to learn not to be afraid, because otherwise he's simply going to use it more, he gets provoked, and he, in fact, escalates.
2 months' time, we have President-elect Donald Trump taking office. The Biden administration has this last moment to do things like authorize the use of ATACMS and what have you. It seems like they did this a little bit too late. What are your hopes from the Biden administration for the next 2 months?
Well, so I'll start with the remark on a little bit too late. It's absolutely very late. Had they done that in 2022, then we would not be sitting here. The war would have been over. There was this moment when Ukraine pushed back Russia from Kharkiv and Kherson, and the front lines of Russia collapsed. At that time, Russia didn't have the drones, didn't have the technology, didn't have Iranian, Chinese, or North Korean support. And it doesn't have that type of aggressive military it has created since that. So had Ukraine been given weapons at the time, it would be able to get back to the territory which was occupied, and that would be the end of it. Then we would go into defensive posture. Now, is it good to give as much weapons as possible right now before the Trump administration comes into office? Absolutely. We don't know what the Trump administration will do. Actually, I think we kind of do. We don't know a specific policy, but we know their approach and strategy. But it is good for everyone, actually including Ukraine and including the Trump administration, that by the time they're in the office, Ukraine has as much weapons as possible so it can defend itself. It gives more policy cover to the Trump administration, and it gives more security to Ukraine and more leverage to Ukraine. So whatever the U.S. is going to be thinking about it, they have more political opportunities to cut a better deal, and definitely it's good for Ukraine, because as we get more weapons, we can protect ourselves better.
It's good for Ukraine. It's good for Donald Trump to be in a strong position when he comes in. Okay, I'd like to get your thoughts now on Donald Trump. What are you expecting to see from the president-elect when he takes office?
So what we know is that he is unpredictable. And that's not because he's random, but because he's unpredictable. It's a strategic feature of Donald Trump that makes him strong. And Putin understands that. And that's why Putin is somewhat afraid of Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is unpredictable. Now, unpredictability requires exactly that, unpredictability. But it gives the Trump administration strength. That, of course, worries both NATO countries in Europe and Ukraine, whether he's going to be all the way on the part, sort of in a more classic way, or he's going to mobilize Europe by threatening to withdraw from NATO or decrease in support, and whether he will put pressure on Ukraine because there might be some other side deal with Russia with respect to the bigger game with China, Iran, North Korea. But I think what people underestimate or don't see is that the Trump administration is going to see China as the main adversary. They will see China as the sort of the master of both Iran and Russia, and therefore they want these conflicts to be done, so they can focus on China. If, on the other hand, Russia gets a fantastic deal on Ukraine, that will embolden both Russia and embolden China and will make the Trump administration to look bad. So I think they will actually be much better than people expect. I have a concern, however. I think a lot of people come into office, even the most savvy politicians, thinking that it is possible to negotiate with Putin. This is exactly the Western mentality, which is focused on value creation. Whereas the Putin mentality is focusing on value destruction. That's the only thing they can do, aggression. So they live according and think according to different rules. What it will mean most likely that they will try to cut a deal. This deal will not work. They will learn that it doesn't work with Russia, and then they will do the right thing. So that period of learning and how fast the Trump administration will learn about the reality of dealing with Putin is what worries me.
Certainly, certainly. Now, there was plans to have a peace summit in Switzerland before Trump takes office. That can has been kicked down the road. Do you think that this is going to happen? There'll be maybe perhaps an attempt? Or do you think that Russia is not going to be on board and they're going to wait for President Trump?
No one is going to do anything except trying to mobilize resources and maybe escalate to strengthen their bargaining positions until the Trump administration is in the office. Once they are there, everyone will start dancing around trying to cut a deal and sabotage that deal at the same time, trying to get a better deal for themselves. And that's going to be the reality.
And that's going to be the reality. Okay, well, Tymofiy Mylovanov, President of Kiev School of Economics and advisor to the Ukrainian president, thank you very much for joining us on Ukraine this week. We very much appreciate your analysis. Thank you, sir. And that's all for this edition of Ukraine This Week. Join us again next week for another summary of all the latest events from the war in Ukraine. Thanks for watching and see you soon. Goodbye.